Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of the Liberia History Channel. My name is Dennis Jar, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In today's edition of the Liberia History Channel, we're going to be looking at the topic from Fernando to Firestone, human trafficking and forced labor in 20th century Liberia. As usual, your presenter is a student of history and FOL public policy analyst, Mrs. Call Family. Call, welcome to the show.
Always my pleasure to be here. Happy Saturday, everyone.
Happy Saturday, Call, and want to invite and welcome all our viewers from across the globe. We do this every Saturday at 7 p.m., so be sure to join us. Uh, Last week we had a very good show. It lasted a little bit, and this was about Samori Toure. And if you missed that, please, you can watch it on YouTube, on Facebook, also on Twitter. Please feel free to always give us a call and tell us how we're doing, and find ways that you yourself can be a part and contribute. As we discussed forced labor, this history is more recent than what we've been discussing, so we think be able to participate, and we're going to open the phone lines later. Please call in your comments and share the show, and let's start. Dr. Pajivo, you are awake and you are all ears listening. Thank you. You are watching. Thank you. Share the show. Invite others to join us as we talk about Fernando Poe. And if you've not heard it, well, you're going to hear something tonight. Carl, why do we need to talk about Fernando Poe to Firestone? First of all, we say from Fernando Poe to Firestone, what is the significance of talking about this? I mean, this was a bad time in the history of the country. Human trafficking and forced labor, those are key terms that we'll be looking at. But why is this important to talk about?
Well, I mean, most of the history that we've been presenting has been marked with basically this subject, right? So every time we talk about a time period, it's always stained with this recurring theme of human bondage, human beings used against their will, to do work or to be even sold. We talk about, the slave trade. We talk about so many things throughout history. And this crisis with the Fernando Poe and also with Firestone, it wasn't only Fernando Poe and Firestone, even the road construction project, the longest road in Liberia, which is the road from Monrovia to the Guinea border. All of these things were basically created with laborers that did not have a choice and often were not compensated. Excuse me. So we will be talking about, Firestone and Fernando Poe and why the Fernando Poe crisis became an international scandal and why the United States led the League of Nations basically to accuse the Liberian government of engaging in the slave trade. I'm having trouble hearing you, Dennis. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's my fault. Forced labor, human trafficking in 20th century Liberia. Now we are even hearing about human trafficking today
Exactly.
in Liberia. What a history. Well, Fernando Poe in my village is referred to as Napo because Napo is we like to cut things short. So there is a link between Fernando Poe between Firestone and Fernando Poe, and we're going to be looking at that quickly. Let's start with a little history of both Fernando Poe to bring our viewers up to speed.
Okay, so you want to talk about the history of Fernando Poe is basically an island that was used at one point as an agricultural plantation for sugar, and there were before this labor crisis, There are also indigenous people at Fernando Po. Before the labor crisis, there were missionaries there. The missionaries always going first. And then later on, when the island was occupied by the Portuguese, they wanted to turn, they had very fertile soil on this island. They wanted to turn Fernando Po into basically a giant a sugar plantation. So initially, a lot of the people who were working on the sugar plantation were people who were enslaved locally, but the conditions were so harsh and so brutal. They needed a constant refreshing of laborers. It wasn't a healthy work environment. There were lots of casualties. So they started, scouting labor and paying for these laborers, paying, chiefs along the coast for people that they could take into this area to go work. There was initially many of the people that were taken were from territories that had been controlled by the British, and they would even go as far up the coast as Liberia, negotiating with people in the Kavala River area for human beings. Scouting labor. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's basically it, and then everyone knows that Firestone is a U.S. rubber company. So so this is the 20th century. This is the 1900s. It's really important for me to put that out there, because when we talk about slavery, we talk about people going and negotiating for labor. It's really important, of course, for me to put, the slave trade has been abolished, and they were going to pretend to compensate people $1 a week, which was not a lot of money. I also want to put things into the proper context. You have to understand, in the 1920s, there was also forced labor going on in the southern United States. You had sharecropping going on in places like Texas and Georgia, where people were working on these plantations and really were not free to go. So the moral issue becomes, why is the United States so all of a sudden, leading the League of Nations, and they're so appalled, but they're not dealing with the labor crisis in their own country, the indentured servitude in the cotton plantations in the South, and the orange groves in Florida, where you have people that are not free to go because they've created this false system of indebtedness. So there's a lot of very strange and hypocritical turns. But what I want to start out with is, there's three things happening at once. You've got Marcus Garvey, UNIA, wanting to negotiate for the United Negro Improvement Association, wanting to negotiate for land in Liberia. You have a situation where the British are controlling the whole rubber trade, and the United States of America is in the midst of, they're about to go into basically an economic crisis in the United States. This is the 1920s. Harvey Firestone has this brilliant idea of, instead of purchasing rubber, we could grow our own rubber. Well, rubber doesn't grow in the United States. They needed to go somewhere where it was conducive. Why not Liberia? Why not this little reserve area that we've always been having relationships with? Our descendants, enslaved people, are there. We're going to go in there and we're going to manipulate the situation. We're going to build the largest plantation in the history of humanity. So there was a point in time when Firestone was literally the largest plantation in the world. And so when this was the vision of Harvey Firestone, he's going to build the largest plantation ever built in the history of humanity, the known history of humanity, and it was going to be located in Liberia. Well, with a large plantation, you need a lot of labor, right? This is before real mechanized farming. In fact, it is because of Firestone and the production of rubber that you even have the evolution of or not the evolution, but the emergence of farm machines, because now you have rubber for tires. So you even have the agricultural boom in the United States mechanized farming in the United States, there's a direct correlation between Firestone rubber plantation and the agricultural industry in the United States. So Firestone did far more for the U.S. economy, far more than it did for Liberia, which is always the case. The other thing that occurred because of Firestone is now you have a booming automobile industry, which is a direct result of rubber. So now you have, roads, all these great interstates that we see in the United States that were built. Those were all the result of Firestone labor. I wanted to lay that premise before starting to talk about what exactly happened, what this forced labor was, and who these players the players, the actors, the participants in this horrible scheme, really. You could actually, you want to start doing the slideshow a little at a time, or would you like us to do?
Yeah, so on Firestone, it's important to mention also the background. This is Firestone, that's a private company, but the U.S. government is involved, but this is not through Congress, right? It's through a private guy. And this was happening almost like, starting with the debt issue, is like holding Liberia hostage with this whole Firestone situation. I want you to give a little background about that.
So it definitely was a quasi-government initiative, right? So government's pushing this because the United States government is very much married to these corporations, because these corporations drive the economy. It's important for people to. Harvey Firestone, had the full support of the U.S. government, and they even used Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, to negotiate with the Liberian government. And he was being sent by the U.S. government on behalf of Firestone, which is really interesting. So Du Bois almost was like this negotiator, this middle person. And he was also there to make sure that UNIA and Marcus Garvey didn't take a strong foothold in Liberia as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that came out of those negotiations was the land that UNIA was promised, that UNIA paid for, gave a huge deposit towards, was given to Firestone, and Garvey was not reimbursed. So those are some of the things, and then Garvey later is falsely accused of corruption because he paid for land and took all this money from all of these poor Black people in the global diaspora, the Caribbean and the United States and whatnot, and he wasn't able to deliver. So the whole story goes, Marcus Garvey was sold for rice. Well, the rice that he was sold for, because one of the negotiations was, where are we going to get the laborers? The number of people that they needed to work on the plantations, the part of negotiations, where are they going to come from? We've got people farming, they're producing food. Firestone said, take all the people off the farms. Du Bois like, bring them to work for Firestone. We will pay them. And, get them off those farms, bring them to the rainforest. They'll clear the rainforest. And then we have rice growers in South Carolina and the seacoast of Georgia. And when we bring the rubber, or when we take ships with equipment, we'll also bring rice. And so they don't have to grow rice. We'll grow the rice in America, and we'll take it to Liberia, and we'll give it to them. And so, and hence, everybody gets their 20 pusawa and their 20 cups of rice, in exchange for slave labor.
That's 10, not 20. That's what poo in Pele.
Oh no, I thought it was 20. Yeah. Pusawa.
Gravel called 10 poo also. That's how I know.
Pusawa,
and that's how now we are hooked on rice on pusawa. All right. Firestone.
Let's start with Fernando Poe.
All right.
You can keep that slide up. I think we'll keep the slide up. So basically, Liberia, they say Liberia provided laborers to Spain, France, England, other, not the countries, but, people who were seeking workers. So thousands of people were needed at Fernando Po, and they were negotiating for these people. And when they could no longer get volunteers, they started to force people, trick people, force people. And so the question then becomes, why was it possible to force people to go to work? Why was this even an idea that was possible? There's a couple of things that are happening. So the situation in Liberia is one that we've touched on in many of the shows before, where you have a lot of our leaders. I'm trying to choose my words very carefully. A lot of our leaders are using human beings, to work for them without their necessary consent. So you had a situation in Liberia where if a chief has a farm, many of those working on the farm, many of those laborers working on the farm may not have been free to go. If someone is bringing goods from, let's say, Ganta to Duko, to Monrovia, those goods were usually carried by people who were not really voluntarily doing it. These loads were usually carried on their head. So we talk about the trade into the interior, we talk about rice, all of the production that was going on. A lot of times those people doing that work in the traditional sense were kind of obligated to do it, right? And now you also have a situation where, because the labor is controlled by, the chief or the head men,
Hold on, call. You said the Pusawa meant 20. I said 10. Ali, you said 30. So we all in 10. So that's important to. There's 10 somewhere, because this is all 10. Go ahead.
So I think Pusawa means 20. That's what I've read. And I think it's 2 10s is what they're saying. Pusawa. 2 10s. I could be wrong. Where are my Pella experts at? So I think Pusawa means 2 10s. I just didn't want to argue because I don't speak Pella. And that's just what I was told.
Yeah, I was told 10, but let's go. There's 10 somewhere in that.
Yeah, so I think it means 2 10s. The literal translation is 2 10s. So sorry, I lost track.
Yeah, so we're talking about what made the situation ripe for people to come to Liberia for forced labor, and we're talking about.
Well, not just Liberia; they were getting forced labor from everywhere. But this is the culture we have,
right,
of using people's labor against their will, is problematic, and is what made the situation ripe for exploitation. The issue too is, they would also trick some of these guys. There were incidents during the League of Nations report where they would tell them, "Oh, you're going to go work, somewhere else," and then they would force them onto the ship, and sometimes at gunpoint. And so, every month, they were promised that they'd be paid $1 or $1.50 per month, which was, the equivalent of basically, nothing. And it's like making, I don't know what that would be in today's money. It'd probably be like $100 and something or $200 in a month. And they were going into situations where they were working themselves to death, basically. You had the involvement of Liberian government officials who were assigned on the coast. You had the involvement of traditional leaders. You had the involvement of our our Secretary of the Interior, which is the equivalent of the Internal Affairs Minister today. Mamadou Massaquoi was involved, or was named as one of those who was involved in forcing people to go to Fernando Po. So I asked myself, why would Mamadou Massaquoi collude with, these criminal, government agents to sell other indigenous people or force other indigenous people into bondage, really? And it started to occur to me, the context of time period, they didn't see that these people, they didn't recognize that these people had rights. They were expendable. You had Diderot was very upset about this. Diderot at the time, he was one of those that, bared witness against the government in this situation, and gave testimony and had some of his people give testimony. But Diderot had forced laborers at Trois Farm. But that was acceptable because they weren't getting on a ship and going to Fernando Po. So one of the things I started to discover as I read into all of this was the hypocrisy on all sides was just shocking. So it's like, wait a minute. So Trois Farm had forced laborers, but that was okay. That they forced his forced laborers to get on a ship and go to Fernando Po. That is what made him mad. And then you start getting into all of these other incidents like, wait a minute, Mamadou Massaquoi, the American Liberians that were involved, they knew better. They were not part of, they should not have been part of this. They should have known better. They know the laws of the country. They're direct agents of the Liberian government. Why would they have participated in something? I mean, one of the first things they did in 1847 was they outlawed slavery on Liberian soil. So why was it permissible and acceptable? And this was going on for so long. And the question becomes, why is Firestone coming in now and there's not enough workers? There's not enough people to clear the rainforest to build the largest plantation in the world. So this becomes an issue. And then the League of Nations gets involved. And now we're going to have a labor crisis. We're going to put the Liberian government on trial, rightfully so. But again, the air of hypocrisy. Why are you putting the Liberian government on trial when you, the United States, are having also forced laborers in your territories in the United States, in your states, in your southern states? It is because Firestone needed those workers. It is because Firestone needed those workers. I want you to, I wanted this to be interactive because, and also there's a lot of books available on the Fernando Po crisis. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about that. I wanted to show some pictures. I wanted to kind of talk about the culture that we created around, using people for the benefit of others, using people's labor for the benefit of others. Let's go to the slideshow, Dennis. I wanted to show a couple of things. And are there any questions? I'm not logged into either Facebook or YouTube, but I'm sure you're taking care of that and watching that for us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you continue to ask, why this is happening.
Yeah.
D12, for instance, had, as you say, had forced labor on his farm in Trois Farm. The government of Liberia was also practicing that. U.S., there is slavery in the U.S., and U.S. is upset. Why? So the elections also, because of people that were complaining about this, the critics, because I've interviewed others on this show who were, very sympathetic to CDB King and say, well, it was because of the election. People who lost the elections, they were doing this.
This is somewhat true, but the President King himself, if he was not aware, I haven't been able to see any evidence that he was aware, but his officials, his appointees were participating in this.
His vice president.
Yes, and his directly his appointees, right? So you've got Mamadou Massaquoi, you've got his direct people who are directly employed with the government, paramount chiefs. I want to say this, paramount chiefs at this time, these coastal chiefs were agents of the Liberian government.
Yeah.
People don't like to say that, but it's true. They also knew better. Even if they weren't agents, even if they're traditional leaders, it at some point, slavery has been abolished. At some point, that the world no longer accepts using human beings as chattel. So the justification for this, again, is that they're paying these people $1 to $1.50 a month. I earlier misspoke and said per week, per month, for going and risking their lives. And many of these people died, and some of them never were even brought home. There's missionary journals that I've read on the situation, and they talk about, interacting with crewmen who could have been Bois, who could have been Grabo, because again, all the coastal people in Liberia were just generically referred to as crew. They could have also been clout, but who went there to work and they were longing to go home. They said they were so far away from home, but they couldn't go home because they still had obligations. Who knows what became of those people? Who knows if they remained there? Who knows if they remained there or if they ever made it back?
Yeah.
That's the problem. So go ahead.
No, I said till today, I've heard that there are still Liberians living in that part of the world.
Descendants of and so this is, you're talking about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So roughly a little less than 100 years ago. So you of course, you still have, their descendants, but many of them perished. Some, very few, made it back to Liberia, and others are there. And they're, intermarried and intermingled with other people who were taken to Fernando Po. They're also native people of Fernando Po. So it wasn't only Liberians, they also took laborers from Sierra Leone, from all over the place. And of course, from, right there in Angola, all those areas. So the ethnic diversity at the island of Fernando Po, the ethnic makeup was from all along the West African coast. Almost like what you see in Brazil with, with slavery. When you're taking people, you take them from where you can get them. And so when people say, oh yeah, there's descendants of Liberians, yes, but they're intermarried and intermingled with many, many other people. I mean, for that matter, there's descendants of Liberians living in Georgia. So, I mean, from slavery. So this is what it is. And somebody might be able to say, oh yes, my great great grandfather was crew, or my great grandfather was Vasa. My mother came from Angola, or my mother was a native of Fernando Po. So the people are there, and they're very diverse, and they're all mixed up now.
Yeah.
So I put this up because go back to the Firestone slide, please. I put this slide up that says, safeguarding the source of the supply. This is a vintage article that was written there. The U.S. government, through Firestone, this was a huge economic investment for the United States in the early 1920s. I mean, you had Harvard, the Harvard expedition that went to Liberia in 1926 is also connected to this. They're going in there to study tropical medicine because they want to make sure that their laborers, their workers, are going to be able to remain healthy enough to do what they need to have done. So you've got the Harvard expedition going in also as a support to this, right? So you've got the medical expedition going in. They're not only doing research, they're also doing, they're not only doing medical research, they're also doing other forms of research. So now you've got this thing where the Liberian government is allowing all of these mechanisms to come in and literally dismantle our traditional agricultural network. So one of the things I want you to understand that used to happen with the massive farms that we once had, like the big rice farms and things, many of the people working on the big farms, it wasn't like community gardening or, okay, today we'll go scratch John farm, tomorrow we'll go scratch, Amy farm or whatever. We used to have these very large farms, and many of the people working on those farms were required to do that. And after the harvest came, you working for some paramount chief, you were required to, process the rice, haul the rice, do everything, tie the rice in bags, put it in kenja, and carry it to wherever you're going to go sell it. So this was not just subsistence agriculture that was happening in the Liberian hinterland. These people were producing a lot of food before Firestone came and disrupted that. They were producing food for export. There were huge coffee plantations. You had 12 farms. You had massive farms all over the place. 12 Farm became a rubber plantation later because of this whole thing with the one of the rewards they gave Dito 12 was he received, a huge sum of rubber signs to plant on his farm. So he became a rubber supplier as well for Firestone. So the reason I'm saying all of this is that these stories that we tell, these stories that we share very simplistically, we should really look at it holistically and look at the different nuances. And the reason I'm saying that is because if we don't understand what happened and how it happened, we're going to repeat. In fact, we are repeating some of these same things today.
Yeah.
One of the questions our friend Dr. Jacinth Carr brought up when we were discussing this in preparation for the show, he said it's interesting that the League of Nations did not investigate the Portuguese or those who were running the plantation at Fernando Po.
Yeah.
Or any of the other people along the coast who were supplying laborers to the Portuguese at Fernando Po. It's very interesting that the emphasis was on Liberia alone, as if Liberia was running Fernando Po, as if Liberia was the one controlling the plantation at Fernando Po. This doesn't mean that the Liberian government should not have been condemned for its participation along with all of the other coastal people that were supplying laborers. But the laborers were being supplied to Fernando Po. And these people were holding these people in the most deplorable conditions. And the casualty rate was so absurd that they had to keep returning for more people. Until places like Angola started saying, no, we're not sending any more people over there, they're just dying. So the question happens, now is why Liberia? And why this big, hoopla? So Dito 12 ran for president and he lost. Not 12, he ran for representative and actually he won. But these are politicians, this is political opposition. One of the things I always laugh at when people say, oh, there was a one-party system, there was no political opposition. It's crazy. There was huge opposition in Liberia, and there was a constant struggle. And when Dito 12 served as representative, he wasn't a member of the True Whig Party. But we don't talk about that. We say, just like to say one party system because we only focus on the presidency.
How about Tubman squashed that? That's why a lot of people are left with this whole idea of one party state.
Yeah, it's funny because Liberians don't, and also with the false notion of an imperial presidency, right? Because of Tubman, everybody thinks the country started with Tubman.
Right.
They don't. Yeah, it's So anyway. Yeah, Tubman was definitely the first African dictator, modern African dictator. So
don't let our friend hear you.
Who?
Dr. To.
About what?
About Tubman. He said the first modern dictator.
Of course he was the first modern dictator. All dictators that came after were, if you look at Mobutu Sese Seko, Mobutu tried to dress and walk and act like Tubman. Tubman was his idol. That guy was cool. Everybody wanted to be Tubman. All the dictators, even you even go as far as to look at what's his name, Idi Amin Dada. He wore his hat like Tubman. Liberians don't realize we were some trendsetters. We created the stereotypical African dictator. All the caricatures that came after were trying to emulate Tubman. And I wouldn't be surprised if they all had a shrine to Tubman in their house. But Tubman was a quintessential role model for all the dictators that came after African independence, after African countries obtained their independence. That's another show for another day. But nobody can deny that he was a dictator. He's in every sense of the word. Does that mean he wasn't smart? Did he not do good things? It doesn't mean that. It means he was a dictator, because it's a fact. My favorite dictator, but he was a dictator. So let's get to the next slide. So this is one of the Firestone, one of the people who was, this is an example of a person who was used as a laborer on Firestone plantation. One of the things I find really amusing is how they like to, the propaganda videos are made in the 1930s and 40s. They have all the Firestone workers dressed in these, like, khaki shorts, and, everybody looks clean, and they, like they were well taken care of. But it was all for propaganda for the American audience. This
Yeah.
is what we're doing in Africa. Look how nice everybody is organized. But the truth is, Firestone was modeled, it was modeled after a classic slave plantation in the American South. I mean, you go through Firestone today in 2020, the layout of it, you want to hum old Negro spirituals as you drive through, Harbel, because it looks like 1850, Mississippi. It does. And so this is what people really look like when they were clearing the rainforest, with their bare hands. Really, they had hand tools. There was no mechanized farming. You're talking about thousands of acres of rainforest being cleared by human labor. People who did not volunteer to do so in the early stages. So now you've taken all of these workers off of the rice farms, and you have taken them a lot of times very far from their homes to Harbel to work. We'll go to the next slide.
And some say they were getting paid, right? So
again, compensation in the terms of, okay, we're going to give you $1 a month or $2 a month or $1.50 a month. But then out of this money, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for that. At the end of the day, you owe more than you earned. That was what was happening in the early stages. And the reason they did this was so that they were using the old sharecropper system that they used in America, because they wanted these people to feel that they were indebted, so they would have a right to detain them. If the work was too hard, and they say, you know what, I will walk back to, to Nimba, or walk back to Lupa if I have to. I can't do this. You were not allowed to leave.
Because you owe them.
Yes. So, because if they didn't do that, if they didn't make these people, create a system where you'd be indebted to them, we're drawing for this. Oh, you had to go see the doctor the other day. You had, snake bite, and we had to treat it. So we're taking that from your pay. Oh, your woman gave birth, and whatever the excuse. And they kept fine, detailed records of this.
Yeah. So they had to make condition like a CPP framework document, so you can. That was a joke.
Yes, yes. You can't. You're not free to go. So you can go to the next slide. So this is an example of Firestone workers. And this is a picture that they put together. These are new Firestone workers, some headmen, different people that they brought in. And so the guys with the hats, these are headmen, or what we call chiefs, or, these are the big shots. Anytime you see this hat, this is a representation of someone who has some authority over status. So the complacency of our rulers, our leaders in this, these are the guys who would have said, oh, you know what, I will bring you 200 men. Another guy said, okay, each chief, you charged with the task of bringing 200 men. We're going to pay you this much for these men. One of the things I want you to understand is that they're going to pay this guy for a certain number of men.
Right.
And so that's how they absolve themselves of the responsibility, because, oh no, we just paid someone to recruit workers. And we only gave them AFL to support them. You understand? So now you're absolving yourself of using the military and using, anything, because now you're paying their representatives, their leaders to recruit.
And the leaders are getting paid per head, how many
Yes.
people you recruit. So
Yes.
you have incentive to recruit more.
Exactly.
Making this more interactive, let's bring in some comments here.
Okay.
Focus on the positive. Says slavery hasn't ended but went underground and more lucrative.
I wouldn't say more lucrative, but okay.
Elvis Morris said, talking about Fernando Poe, Dobo Blee Gale is one of the people who made it back. He was a Grand Gideon who was captured in Sino County while visiting his family. Front Page Africa wrote a piece about him, and I read that piece too about Dobo Blee Gale. Pastor says slavery is an obscenity. It isn't only stealing people's labor, but it's stealing people's lives. Sam says, what can you show has proof that this person on the picture is a Firestone worker? Sam says,
he's asking what I can show as proof. So the source of the photo is the Harvard expedition team, right. 1926, and they took this picture at Firestone.
Right. And Sam said you can go on Focus on Liberia YouTube page. We have the videos of the Firestone pictures. So all these pictures are there, so you can look at them at your leisure.
Yeah.
Antebellum Black Americans say, what? Home old spiritual, Negro spirituals, when you were talking about that, even today, if you drive through Firestone, it looks like the 1850 South.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what it is. I mean, it is exactly modeled off of a slave plantation. You've got the big house, you've got the smaller places for the slave quarters. I mean, there's no difference. It's completely modeled after that.
And look at the house in the background there. It's like you are somewhere in Alabama or Mississippi.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll go to the next.
Yeah, those are the few comments.
So one of the other, this is Queen Swakoko. And we're going to start talking about the Harvard expedition team now. And, this idea that human beings are supposed to be chattel. This is Queen Swakoko. This is a picture taken of her in her elderly state by the Harvard expedition team. And she was very beautiful, as you can see. This is a very old woman by 1926. When they got to Swakoko, they wanted porters. And I don't know if your audience knows what porters are, but these are people that carry loads because there were no, trucks and things like that. And you had footpaths you had some cars in Liberia in 1926. There were cars, there were automobiles, but not a lot. And they couldn't go into the deep, thick rainforest. So if you're going deep into the interior, you had to go by foot. So they had all of this heavy equipment to get there. They're trying to negotiate for porters, and they asked Queen Swakoko and her son, who was in charge. She was older, so she was no longer really making a lot of decisions. Her son provides the Harvard expedition team with human labor. And unfortunately, by 1926, most of the people in these closer areas, like Swakoko and in these areas, had already been drained. The young, able-bodied men were already clearing the rainforest. So now you have a situation where the people who are left are women, and not even just strong, able-bodied women, but pregnant women or women with very young children. Those are usually people that are left in the town, or the very old or the sick, because everyone who was capable of working had been taken and sent to Firestone. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, this is a misplaced. Anyway, that's okay. So let's go back. I'm gonna we'll remember what I said about Swakoko. So these are scenes from Monrovia. At this time, the armed forces of Liberia is getting a lot of resources in the 1920s from the U.S. government. So go to the next slide, please. If you see here, there's a road. You see the little car. Anyway, we passed it. So this is AFL is getting resources. They're getting guns. AFL is getting, all of this through this so-called loan and Firestone. They're getting all of this resource pumped into the Liberian military. And African militaries were not created to protect African people from invasion or from other countries. African militaries all over Africa, even in the colonial countries, were created to subdue and control African people. Where the U.S. military was created to subdue and control Indians, and then later on to protect America against, foreign threats or whatever. In Africa, the military is not there to protect African citizens. It's there to protect. It's there to basically control and subdue Africans. This is really important to understand. Somebody say they're pumping money into the AFL. They're not. The AFL is not there to defend Musu living, behind Baisala or behind Sanikoli. AFL is there to make sure that, Dennis Ja and his militia of Grable warriors do not rebel. This is important to note. So at the same time, you're engaged in this massive drain of labor, completely changing the economic flow. Also, you're bringing an end to the ability of people who had been self-sufficient in agriculture for many, many centuries, since the earliest recorded time. People who grew surplus food and were able to export food and go take food to the coast and trade rice and other agricultural products are now being those massive historic farms, that historic economic network is now being shut down, and those laborers are being shifted to clear the rainforest in preparation for the largest plantation in human history. They cannot do this without a military. AFL now is receiving more resources than ever before. Next slide.
Carl, this is important because today, even today, we talk about concession agreements. We talk about investors or investment.
Yes.
So I don't know what was told to the Liberian people as to how Firestone will benefit them or will benefit the people. Because the history is still there that our own companies or the investors and these concessional agreements, they don't benefit us.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the thing that's very funny to me is that you hear educated economists saying things like, direct foreign investment when they're talking about direct foreign extraction.
Yeah.
The investment and extraction are not synonymous, but instead of us using the correct terminology, we use the term investment. I mean, it's not investment; it's direct foreign extraction. It's other people coming in and extracting your resources for the benefit of themselves and their fellow citizens in some foreign country. So Firestone was not an investment; it was an extraction project, like most of these concessions are.
Right. So what was the selling point for Firestones that the Liberian government bought into this?
They didn't have a choice. This is the 1920s. They couldn't have said no. Right? You had a situation where the Liberian government was bringing they were bringing UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association. Marcus Garvey was saying, hey, we're going to bring a lot of skilled and educated people from the Caribbean and North America, African people of African descent. We are going to build massive agricultural stations. We're going to do manufacturing. All of these people have been skilled working in the United Kingdom, working in the United States, in the northern factories. We're going to bring that technology to Liberia, and we're going to make Liberia a bustling economy. And a lot of African Americans who were working in factories in the United States at various levels, learning all of this technology, all bought into it, took their life savings and poured it into Liberia, only for the Liberian government to be coerced through the work of J. Edgar Hoover and others to sabotage Marcus Garvey and replace Garvey with Firestone. That particular topic is a show all by itself.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening now, they use the Bois to come in, and he was sent by the U.S. government to go negotiate for Firestone. So this is why I say it's a quasi-government operation. So now they've come in, and these are the things that they're doing. This is a picture of Monrovia, typical area. This is going up towards Cape Mesurado. This is how this area looked in 1920, 1926. This is how the average home looked in that area. I'm showing this just to demonstrate the need that Liberia had for this innovation that Garvey was bringing.
Yeah.
The country itself was being choked by these new colonial powers all around them. They didn't like that Liberia stood as kind of an affront to colonialism. Here you have a group of these Black people self-governing at a time when, the Berlin Conference has passed. Ivory Coast is engaged in some of the most horrible forced labor in West Africa, right? They're building Abidjan with people, human beings that they're, at gunpoint. So everyone in the country is building infrastructure by force at gunpoint. People are dying in the groves because they're being forced to clear rainforests and to build infrastructure for France. And in Ivory Coast, it is horrible what's happening to the people. So they don't need their citizens looking to Liberia as an example of where they're going to be. So they're cutting Liberia off from trade. They're trying to economically sabotage Liberia. I mean, this is not by accident. So this is the kind of situation. So Liberians are now smaller households trying to engage in subsistence farming. They're trying to do what they can do. The earlier massive coffee plantations you used to see around Mount Coffee where they were exporting, all of that shut down. So all of that economic activity that was occurring before the partitioning of Africa has now been shut down. Don't trade with these uppity Negroes, excuse my language. Don't trade with these guys, because if you allow them to be prosperous and you trade with them as equals, that is going to serve as an inspiration to the subjects of the Queen or the subjects of France. So it's not acceptable. So Liberia is being crushed. Marcus Garvey is like, we can fix this. Because they're also in America destroying Black Wall Street, right? They're destroying, all of these economic hubs in the United States as well. So they're suppressing African American economic activity simultaneously.
Your audio is having some problem there.
Yeah, okay, I'll go out and come back in.
Yeah.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jar.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. This is the Liberia History Channel. the presenter called Famble, and we are discussing from Fernando to Firestone, human trafficking and forced labor in 20th century Liberia. If you are just joining us, again, share the show, invite someone. We are here every Saturday at 7 p.m. to talk about the history of our dear country, Liberia. Keep tuned. We're going to take another short break and we will be right back. Welcome back to the show. Carl, let's continue our topic on from Fernando to Firestone, human trafficking and forced labor in 20th century Liberia.
Yes. So, you know, I forgot what we were saying when I went out. So yeah, so this was the situation. And so Garvey had a vision to fix this. And if you go back and you look at the plans and what was being planned by UNIA, he was brilliant because he drew upon the best minds in the African, world, in the African diaspora. He drew upon the best minds, the most educated. He drew upon the most visionary, the most successful. He worked with some of the most successful business people. Imagine being a successful business person in that kind of environment in the 1920s in the United States. Imagine how innovative you had to be to become a wealthy person of African descent in a place like New York in the 1920s. Imagine the great odds and obstacles you had to overcome to be economically successful. So these are the kinds of people that were working with UNIA.
Right. And UNIA is the Universal Negro Improvement Association.
That's correct. So, people like to say, oh, how did Garvey do all of this? The UNIA was not a one-man show. It was a massive organization. I mean, even Malcolm X's father was a member. So you had pastors. Malcolm X, his father was a reverend, and he was a member of UNIA. That's one of the reasons his father was killed. So you had all of these prominent African Americans who were pastors and doctors and business people that were part of UNIA that were wanting to invest in this idea of going to Liberia. So Marcus Garvey was not a one-man show. And the other thing, he couldn't be used by the establishment. And so they had to destroy him. They started with, one of the things that they love to do is come up with allegations of corruption in order to discredit people who fight for, self-determination. It is just what happens. It's a repeated broken record that occurs. They did it to E.J. Roy. They did it to, so many people. This is just what it is. So what they did, they sabotaged Garvey, and they decided to do a 99-year lease for 1 million acres at $1 an acre. And then
6 cents per acre.
I'm sorry?
So 6 cents per acre for the Firestone land.
No, it was $1 an acre for the first year. And then after that, it was $6,000. Yeah, so there was 6 cents per acre. Then it was $6,000 a year after that for the second term and going forward. But originally that was the agreement. And then they said, oh, we'll only do that for the first year. So it went from being $1 million a year to $6,000 a year. And if you will get into some of the things that happened, that Firestone, how the United States benefited, for $6,000 a year, and the incredible casualties, the number of people that died clearing that rainforest because the conditions they were forced to work under. The death toll was not even recorded accurately. So that's a different thing. So here you have a demonstration of, and sorry, these slides are kind of disorderly, but it's a demonstration of the boats that were used to bring goods from the bigger ships to the mainland. So you would have these boats go out, they would bring equipment, and then you would have human beings then take the equipment from the beach and march it into the rainforest.
Yeah. And talking about Firestone, is this agreement, I think, it was renewed under President Sirleaf? Am I correct?
Yes.
Talking about the protest now, carrying loads for people. And part of this, even in my lifetime as a child, I think I have seen this. So it continued many years after 1926.
So in the last episode, we're talking about some moratorium. We're talking about long distance traders taking goods, from what was Liberia Northern Territory to faraway places like Senegambia, even Mauritania. So we have a long history of porters. We have a long history of people being used, enslaved people usually, being used to carry loads. I mean, this kind of thing was introduced before European contact, really through Arab contact, through our interaction with Asiatic people that invaded Northwest Africa first. So this concept, these caravans through the desert, human caravans, I mean, this is something that has been going on for many centuries in West Africa. But this is the 20th century. This is the 1900s. This is not some, far long gone barbaric time. This is modernity.
Yeah.
This is at a time when, there's photography, there's videos of this. There's film, motion pictures have been invented. Not too long after this, you've got, telegraphs in Monrovia. You have automobiles in Monrovia. This is going on at a time when you have electricity in Monrovia and along the coast. This is going on. This is a modern time period. We had the transatlantic cable in Liberia at this time. So you could send a telegraph across the ocean in 1926, and here are human beings. And you see the fourth person is carrying a weapon, a gun. This is because, of either one of two things. I mean, is that they got attacked by imaginary people that would come and attack them. I don't know who would attack them and try to take their goods. But more than likely, this is to serve as a deterrent. If you decide, I'm tired, I can't do this, I'm going to run, you get shot. Let's go to the next slide.
Taking a break.
So this is to demonstrate, the loads. They bring the load, and sometimes they lost porters. I want people to understand that these people that were carrying these goods, sometimes they couldn't, they would break down. Sometimes it would just fall out, they just leave them on the side of the road. So you get to the next town and the people are not able to go forward. So you need more porters. And remember what I was saying about the towns being almost deserted of able-bodied people?
Yeah.
Because the majority of the able-bodied people were clearing the rainforest to make way for the largest plantation in human history. Well, you get to the next town, nobody there but big bella woman, old lady, old man, small children. So the entire time you hear Harvard expedition people writing in their journals how they're struggling to find porters. You go, when not Fernando pulled at Firestone. So they stopped the Fernando Pool thing and they gathered all the rest of the workers, but now you've got a labor crisis, right? You've got a labor crisis.
These are some of the things that we celebrate, right? When they talk about normal day Liberia and things were okay, we're talking about Firestone. So even in these conditions, I want to speculate that people still thought that these were good days, that they have work and that we have a company, we have a plantation.
So I haven't read where anyone who was working for Firestone at that time as a laborer was happy about it at that time. So this is the 1920s. Now, we're not going to say that about the 1970s, right? You won't necessarily say about the 1970s or 80s. Things were certainly improved by then. I know when Tubman became president, many things improved at Firestone, but this is before Tubman. This was the 1920s. So I don't want us to jumble. I've actually never heard of anyone refer to the 1920s in Liberia as the good old days. You'd have to be completely ignorant to do so. This time period was worse than the 1800s in many ways. Even though we had the rolling wars in the 1800s in the interior where we're constantly having, wars and killing, burning down villages, there were a lot of horrible things that were happening. But I'm talking about in the settled modern part of Liberia, not the interior hinterland that was more autonomous. You had more economic growth and the 19th century, the late 19th century was the heyday economically, compared to this period. This was a depressed, economically depressed period for Liberia. And also you have to know that, and I think I said it earlier, you've already had the Berlin Conference, the partitioning of Africa, and now you're getting into the real hardcore sabotage of the Liberian state. Hardcore sabotage of the Liberian state. I mean, it's not even hidden. It's like we're going to manipulate the situation. We're going to use Bois, who is an agent really of imperialism. We're going to have him come in and we're going to have him sabotage, everything. And this is what we have. So this is not a good time. This was not a good time period for Liberia at all.
Let's read a few comments here. Jimmy Eastman, I have read that Garvey had targeted the Liberian political and economic elite, has been corrupt and insular, while ignoring the rest of Liberian population's poverty. Joe Moyu, Garvey was a big dreamer. That's why he could not get along with W.E.B. Du Bois. Garvey wanted blacks to pack up and leave and move to Liberia. Du Bois was more practical. That's why he advised King to ignore Garvey. Du Bois was a PhD from Harvard. Garvey was an elementary school dropout. Garvey, with all his pro-Africa stance, never visited Africa. Du Bois died in Ghana after moving there from the USA. The story of two Pan-Africanists. That's Joe.
Yeah, Du Bois was a brilliant man, but he was an agent and he was working with J. Edgar Hoover, and that's documented.
Jimmy said Firestone masqueraded as the savior to Liberia's plight, but at the same time, it was exploiting Liberia and propping up a few elite in Monrovia with disregard to greater population. Firestone could have offered decent wages and improved the local community and economy. This one from Francis Wilson. Please connect the dots, people. Liberia and Ethiopia were the top dogs in Africa and relevant in the world. Liberia has been systematically broken down and Ethiopia is in constant conflict and chaos. How was that done? Divide and conquer from within. Tribalism instigated by Western outsiders still today.
Yeah.
And then about normal days, Francis said when they say normal days, they're talking about the pre-1980 because war was abnormal to Liberia. Those are a few of the countries.
Yeah, I disagree that war was abnormal to Liberia. It was actually during Tubman's era that our rolling wars stopped. Even in the 1920s, there were still violent, vicious wars in the hinterlands of Liberia. Um, we had what was called rolling wars, meaning continuous wars, among the indigenous people. Um, Even the whole thing with Suakoko asking the Liberian government for help is because they were having bloody wars, burning down towns and clans. I mean, we didn't really have when the dictatorship of Tubman took over is really when we put an end to it. And one of the reasons Tubman was asked to run for president is because they felt that he had the skill necessary to basically topple all the big trees in the interior and put an end to our rolling wars, and also destroy a lot of our culture in the process. So history is very complicated. It's not a simple narrative. There's no brush stroke that you can just say, okay, this person was bad, this person was good. The complexities are there. But let's go to the next slide.
Right, and there were also wars of the 1915, 1910, the Crew Wars, the Guerrilla Wars, and all that.
The Pellet Wars. I mean, the whole reason.
Right. So there were wars before.
Yeah, I mean, even it was a continuous thing, and if you follow the show, you will see that because every time our history is punctuated with wars and massacres, and all kinds of things. So
now the men are gone. They are in Firestone clearing the rainforest. I mean, you need protests, right? So women.
Yeah. So who's left in the town? Who's left in the town? The big belly women, the people with young babies. So you don't have any able-bodied men. You don't have even able-bodied women, because even the able-bodied women have been forced into the process of clearing the rainforest. But you have what's left in the town: the pregnant women, the sick people, the women with young babies. And so now we're going to use them as porters.
Were they paid? Were they fed? What were some of the conditions?
So they were given a ration of rice when they would come to a resting point, and they drank, creek water. They just did what they did. They were not given shoes. They were not given any protection. They were carrying loads that were too heavy for the white men to carry. These are pregnant women with babies on their back. They're carrying loads that were too heavy for the white men to carry.
And this was a government-backed, scheme, right? Because the people that are guiding, they are members of the frontier force.
I would say, so we have to be realistic. Yes, it was government-backed, but which government? It's really U.S. government's doing this. If you really want to look at it, this is not really benefiting the Liberian government. This is a U.S. government project. This is the United States of America doing this. This is a U.S. university that is receiving federal funding for this project. They're receiving money from the U.S. government. And so you're at Harvard, it's a private institution, but the U.S. government is funding this. The U.S. government is arming, the U.S., is arming and empowering the military.
In Liberia.
Yes, that's what I said earlier, right? So AFL is getting souped up with lots of money. So a lot of resources are being pumped into this project. And so you can look at this weak government in Monrovia and say, yeah, the Liberian government did it. Did they really? They didn't even have, the government itself did not even have the ability to go in the interior and do anything remotely like this. So now you have this huge foreign power that's really doing this.
Right, but they are not doing it alone. They are working with the Liberian government.
And they're working with, they're not even working with, they're using the Liberian government, they're using the local chiefs, they're using whoever they can use to accomplish their aim. And the question is, was there a choice? The answer is yes, there's always a choice. And what would have been the consequences of the choice? What would have happened if they said no? What happens when we say no to imperialism? What would we have done differently? under those circumstances and conditions at that time. I mean, we're looking at 2022. You've got a gold mine. You've got a gold mine in Cape Mau County, literally poisoning people, literally poisoning human beings. People are ingesting carcinogens, getting, babies are getting sick. And this is just one little gold mine. We're talking about massive imperialist power. And this is during a time of social media, social justice. There was no such thing really as human rights in 1926. There's human rights in 2022. Right? So this is 100 years later, and government is still complacent, even though we have far more tools and rights than we had back then as African people.
Yeah, but that still does not absolve the Liberian government of responsibility.
It doesn't absolve it doesn't absolve 1922, it doesn't absolve 2022. What I'm doing is setting context. And whenever we look at history, it's not about absolving, it's about looking at context and understanding the circumstances that led to it. Of course, they're responsible. And we are responsible today for what's happening today, similarly. What I'm saying is the power that the Liberian government has today is far greater, and the human rights and the knowledge that we have today is far greater than what was available to African people in 1926. This picture of these women were not even looked at and respected as women. They're carrying loads for white men. And the AFL soldiers, these African men who are there with these weapons, what choice did they have in the matter? They could have said, no, these women will not carry this load. This pregnant woman will not carry this load. This expedition is not going to proceed because we don't have any able-bodied porters. That decision was not made. The decision wasn't made in Monrovia. In Monrovia, it's, oh yeah, you guys go ahead. There'll be porters. All the chiefs will give you guys porters. Because they had money, they had things. Even when they got to Swakoko, they tried to give her gifts, and they were giving people stuff. They're giving people nonsense like snuff, rum, as if it was still during the slave trade in the 1800s. Those are the kind of things that the Harvard expedition team was giving to people in exchange for porters. There's an obviously pregnant woman. Girl, I wouldn't even say woman. This is a pregnant girl carrying this type of weight. And we all know, those of us who've been pregnant, that you're not supposed to lift weights. You're supposed to lift anything heavy when you're pregnant. Here she is, load on her head, because she's what was left in the town, walking through thick bush. I said, like, bro, the sawgrass, when I worked for Land Authority, when you're going through and the sawgrass is cutting your arms, imagine being dressed like this, forced to carry load through sawgrass. Fire ants, God knows what else is in that bush, and she was not wearing shoes. Another forced labor project, the Ganta Highway from Monrovia to Ganta. These pictures were taken in what is Bois County now. This is the road. I don't know if any of you went on this road before. It was modernized recently, but you could still see these hills on the side. When you're driving through the rainforest, going to Ganta from Monrovia, going through Kakata. This is what was done, and again, forced labor. Forced labor. They did not have a choice. The people who cleared this road through the rainforest. So this was built over an ancient footpath. So if you ever wonder why, when you coming from Ganta or going to Ganta from Monrovia, the road kind of, it just is strange, right? It's like zigzag. It's not a straight road. Goes from one town to another, and it veers, because this was a footpath. This was an ancient footpath through this territory. This was the original road to Tupo, from north going towards Guinea and into Mali. So from the Liberia end, when you get across the St. John River and get to Ganta, Ganta was a huge market trading area where you could trade in all kinds of goods. People would come from all over West Africa and trade in Ganta. And then you could then take the goods or whatever, and you had a Bani rice station not too far away where you were doing mass rice production. This is the footpath that they would take to Duko. So now they want to open it up to an actual road because this is an automobile age. So now you've got cars coming to Liberia. So what they're doing now is they're turning this foot road into a car road. So this is not a road to Duko. And they're turning into what they call Ganta Highway. And you see the little ladder there. That's a little handmade makeshift ladder. These guys were taking the dirt in makeshift buckets that they made. They didn't even really give them good equipment. And human beings were taking this and dumping. So this is simultaneously happening with Firestone being cleared. You're also using forced labor for the road. Next slide, please. This is a scene of the laborers working, clearing the road by hand. They're doing it with their bare hands. I know this place. I've driven on this road numerous times. And the first time I drove on this road, I had not seen these pictures. It was rainy season. And I remember just thinking how beautiful it was. And I was like, wow, this road is so old. It was, originally the construction project started in 1920s. I kept thinking, how did they do it? Were they using bulldozers? How did they, clear through these hills? They didn't use bulldozers. They didn't use machines. They used the bare hands of human beings.
Cole, what's the lesson here?
This is the lesson is how we got to where we are, and the tremendous pain and struggles our people have been through. And not to forget that these things happened, to understand they happened in the context in which they happened. This isn't intended to make anyone angry. This isn't intended to make anyone sad. It's intended to tell their story. People need to know that they existed and what they did for this country, even though it was most likely not by will, but by force. And this unfortunately was the norm in Africa at this time. I mean, far worse things than this happened in Ivory Coast and Guinea under colonialism. And we always like to say, well, we weren't colonized, so we weren't subjected to certain things. But by the 20th century, the 1900s here, we start to see, economic colonialism coming into Liberia. So we didn't have the political colonialism, but we had the economic colonialism, and this is where it began. This is economic colonialism. This is building infrastructure for economic extraction. That's really what this is about. And it was modeling what they were doing in the neighboring countries.
And we're going to take some calls. If you are there, you want to join the conversation, please. The number to call is 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403#. So call and join the conversation. Let's talk about Liberia. Our time is fast spent. We have gone almost an hour and a half. And so we're going to be taking calls and be a part, questions and comments. So now we have a barroom medicine. Do we?
Nobody likes to tie things all kind of humor. Yeah, it's getting a little heavy. Let's go to the next slide while we're waiting for a caller. So it's just more scenes from the road. You can see, Dennis, I want you to look. These are some really, you could tell some of these are children.
Yeah.
Because again, most of the able-bodied men are at Firestone. But this is also, again, they're trying to penetrate the interior for a reason, right? Because they're planning on other extraction. Next slide. So this is, you know, some of our people them they were negotiating with. This is in Banga, one of the headmen in Banga with his musicians, bluffing with an umbrella.
Yeah, it was cheap there, I guess.
It's a very nice umbrella. So, you know, child labor is also a form of forced labor. The reason I keep talking about the context of the time period, this was happening in the United States in coal mines and things as well. This was happening in Europe. This was happening in Asia. So this is not unique to Africa. Child labor is something that went on globally well into the 20th century. Children were used as workers. What's interesting about Liberia is we have a system of pawning children, giving children away for debt. So go work for these people and so we can, you know, whatever. So a lot of the mission schools that were set up all over Liberian interior, because the government didn't have the resources to build schools, so they paired with church groups to build schools, and you know, encouraged these churches and worked with you know, traditional people to get these schools into the interior. One of them was the day mission. A lot of the children who were working at the day mission were unwanted children. I mean, that were attending. A lot of these early children were, you know, castaway kids or children that were. Sometimes they use different means to get them. They would pay people for the children to attend the school. They would give someone something. Oh, okay, we need students, so we'll give you some incentive. They say, oh no, we need the children to work. Okay, how much will the children earn? Okay, they'll do this. Okay, but then we'll give you the money that the children were going to use, and that's how they got a lot of these kids. Sometimes people even ran away and went to the mission and seeking refuge because wherever they were being abused or whatever the case is. But a lot of these early students at the day mission in the late 1800s, early 1900s were what we consider to be castaway children. Excuse me. Let's go to the next slide, please. No calls yet, Dennis?
We have callers, but let's go to go ahead. We'll bring in the callers.
Okay, so this is Henry Stewart in the school in Mount Coffee. He took in a lot of. Henry Stewart is the guy standing in the back. Henry O. Stewart with the child in his hand. Basically, it was an orphanage, a school at Mount Coffee. He was a pastor, a clergyman, and he took in a lot of children who were used, abused, and exploited, and took them in and educated them and, you know, turned them into productive citizens. A lot of these children, you know, grew up to do wonderful things, worked in government. A lot of these children grew up to be success stories. But you know, these again were children that were victims of child trafficking. You know, children that were being used as laborers in homes that they didn't belong to. And I do want to make a point to say that we talk a lot about American Liberians having children living with them. This happened a lot. We also had a lot of Native people that did the same thing. Unfortunately, that culture of pawning children is very old on the Grain Coast. It's older than Liberia, and children have been used, abused, and exploited for a very long time. Especially if you fought war and you killed all the men, you would take the women and you would, you know, take the children, and those children and those women would become servants when you carry them back to where you're from after you raided and conquered people. And this is the 1920s. You still had these remnants of these wars. A lot of these kids were extremely traumatized. These are children that maybe had lost their fathers, have been ripped out of their homes and been taken somewhere else. And we always talk about how ethnicity is fluid. If you were from a Loma-speaking town and somebody took you to a town where they spoke, let's just say Pella or Gola or something. I don't know where these kids were originally from, but it wasn't always people from the same language group that would take you. So you grow up now, your whole ethnicity is different. So that happened quite a bit. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Let's take some calls now.
Okay.
The first caller here is Evis Morris. Evis, you're live. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ja, and thanks to Ms. Call.
Hey, Elvis.
Like I said, how you doing? Yeah, I always appreciate her presentation. She always, give in-depth details on both sides of the issues. That's why I respect her as an intellect and a scholar.
Thank you.
I just quickly want to state, on this Firestone situation. These are some new information that I'm learning today about this whole Firestone thing. And I mean, I'm overwhelmed a little bit because I feel like there's so much misinformation about this, and even myself have not been quite as informed, on the topic as, Ms. Call has presented here tonight. But secondly, I want to talk about Fernando Poe. I think that's a situation that's been highly contested. As you know, Mr. Ja, I reached out to you on about maybe hosting some of our African American brothers who have somewhat of a different history than some of us natives, to kind of bridge the gap and have a good understanding of what happened. Because Fernando Poe was a situation where obviously some natives were complacent, but obviously the government was also complacent. And I think a lot of people try to deny the fact that the American Liberian government at the time had it was just this made-up thing that people was using for political gain, which is true also, like Ms. Cole said in the presentation. It's partly true. But certainly the government at the time was complacent in the trade or in the selling of labor to Fernando Poe. And I think Ms. Cole has done an excellent job in kind of, breaking it down and giving each side its own blame for the situation that happened on both Firestone and Fernando Poe. Thank you again for the presentation. I'll get off the line. Mr. Job, hopefully we'll talk later and we can set up the time for the show. Thank you again.
Thank you, Elvis.
I just wanted to say something really quick. Between 1926 and 1929, that's the time period that was examined. It's estimated about 4,300 roughly people were taken to Fernando Poe just between 1919 and 1926. So that's a lot of human beings to be taken into forced labor camps.
And talking about that, the son of the Wadabo women, these were women in Maryland. And this was the son. You see, we were here when trouble came to our people. For this reason, Jay was imprisoned and fined. For this reason, Yancey came to our country. He caught our husbands and our brothers, sailed them to Nanapo, and there they die, and there they die. Tell us, Yancey, why? Yancey, why? Whatever women have no husbands, Yancey, why? Whatever women have no brothers, Yancey, why? Mothers, fathers, sons have died waiting for the return. Yancey, why? That was the song, or the whatever women in.
According to the League of Nations book.
Yeah, according to the League
I
of
want to
Nations.
know if actual Grable women sing that song. That's what I want to know. I read that thing. I said, it didn't sound like propaganda, but I would like to know if that song was actually sung by our people.
Yeah.
Because I've only seen that in that book, and I'm like, okay, was that something that the people were really chanting in English, or were they trying to claim that was a translation?
Right. From what I know, there was a lot of grief around Fernando Poe. I don't know.
Oh yes,
if there was a song.
So the father of the former health minister, I believe her father, her son's grandfather, I'm thinking it's his maternal grandfather. So former Minister Bella, who was the health minister under Samuel Doe, her father escaped from Fernando Poe and made it back to Liberia. And so he lived with that trauma and talked about the horrors and shared that with his grandson. So this is real for people. This is very recent.
Yeah.
So this is not ancient history. This is someone my age. His grandfather was a young man and was fortunate to be able to make it back to Liberia on a ship that was coming this way.
Right. And I heard my
I think he stowed away or something like that and was able to make it back here. It's just amazing.
And because these people were tricked, I've heard that my granduncle wept for days because he was not selected to go to Fernando. He missed the boat, and he
Was
felt
it Fernando Po he was crying about, or some other place?
Fernando.
He wanted to go?
Yes, he wanted to go. He didn't know. So when they went deep in the interior to recruit these men, they told them stories that made them want to go.
Yeah, they did trick a lot of people, and then when they got wise, they tried to run away. It's sad, very, very sad. Some of them were taken by force, and some of them through coercion and lies and trickery. So that's true.
Jimmy, you are live. Go ahead, Jimmy. Your contribution, sir.
Yes. Hey, thank you very much, John. Thank you for the program tonight. And Cole, I really appreciate the amount of research and time you have put in this, especially on this topic. To me, this was an inflection point in life for Liberia. The ACS had left. We weren't getting any financial support. Liberia needed financial investment to build the economy, and they couldn't get it. They got a rotten deal from Great Britain. And only thing I didn't understand, you said Liberians had a choice with Firestone. Well, Liberia's sovereignty was at stake. Great Britain was poised to take over. France and Great Britain were ready to just jump on Liberia's territory and take it, claiming that we were not capable of self-rule. But Firestone came in as to pay these debts off, but they too exploited. But what other choice would they have had? And this is because I see the extensive research. What other choice would they have had when Great Britain and France were ready to take their sovereignty and their territory, other than to give into Firestone? That's my question.
So I don't agree that that Britain and France were trying to take their sovereignty at that point. What that struggle between Britain and France, goes back, of course, since independence. By the 1920s, the objective was economic sabotage through these stupid bad loan deals. A lot of, putting Liberia into situations, and this was coordinated between the Americans, the British, and the French. So when Firestone came in, it was part of the economic colonization of Liberia.
Okay.
It's not that they were trying to take Liberia's political sovereignty. They were trying to take Liberia's economic sovereignty. And they did, of course. They succeeded in doing so. So this was no longer a struggle for territory. Excuse me?
So what choice they have?
What choice did they have?
You always have a choice. I mean, there's always a choice, freedom or death. There's always a choice. So
that's an armchair quarterback statement.
No, it's not. It's not because it isn't an armchair quarterback situation, because we had other Africans, like Moratorium we talked about last week, who made a choice. Courage is an island in an ocean of fear. And there were many courageous people before the 1920s. I mean, the situation that Liberia faced in the 1800s was far more dire than what they faced in the 1900s. And I have my own, now I'm going into my opinions, right? But the reason I say so is because in the 1800s, especially late 1800s, you had a real attack on Liberian sovereignty. And these courageous people, even from 1847 with Hilary Teague, Elijah Johnson, E.J. Roy. I mean, these guys were brave. People died so that these people who existed in the 1920s could do the same. And they did not. Would I have been courageous at that time? I don't know. But we have to tell the truth. And it is, they took the easy road because they didn't want to die. They took the easy road because they were afraid.
Thank you,
it was an act of cowardice. And that is unfortunate. And I say that, in the sense of history. There were many courageous things that occurred historically before the 1920s that were extremely courageous, that were almost suicidal. And because of that, they still existed as a country. Liberia still existed in 1926, 1921, 1919. But that generation, that early 20th century generation, made choices that were less courageous than the people who came before them. This is a fact. Things were hard before 1926.
Thank you. Let me bring in more colors here. And looking at this picture, Margaret Mapu doesn't say, "Oh, that my family there, oh, call." Oh my God. All right, let me bring in Professor Larry David. Professor David, you are live. Question or comment, sir?
Hi, Dennis. Greetings from British Columbia, Canada. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Welcome back to FOL.
Well, listen, I want to say, Mrs. Carr, thank you so much for your research. And I just also wanted to say, I just finished reading the book by I think Greg Bittman, who talks about Fernando Poe. And from his perspective, that the greatest problem with that particular era in Liberian history was white supremacy. When you look at it, he says it was a really white supremacy. And I think that far too many people blame the so-called Americo-Liberians for what happened. And I think that particular narrative is extremely dangerous. And I just wanted to say to you, what is your perspective from this viewpoint? And one must keep in mind, as we know about the Berlin Conference, Liberia was on its own. And I don't think people take that into consideration. It was really on its own. No help from America. The European colonial powers were trying to take it. And I think that I don't know why people do that. And look at the rest of Africa. Liberia had no help from the rest of Africa. None. The rest of Africa was under the thumb of European colonial power. So they were on their own. And so what is your point of view from that perspective? That Liberia had no help from Africa, had no help from the United States, had no help from Europe. Again, they were on their own.
Yeah. So I don't thank you. I don't think this is a question of help. This is not a question of help. This is a question of trade, of doing human being things. It's not about being a charity case. Countries exist because they're able to trade and they're recognized by other countries as trade partners. There was an embargo, an economic embargo against Liberia. In addition to the economic embargo against Liberia, brought on by the colonial powers, Europe, and including the United States, beyond the economic embargo, there was then an attempt to economically colonize Liberia. So Liberia now, it has an economic embargo, and then there's also an attempt to take away Liberia's economic sovereignty, which they were successful in doing so in the early 19th century. So Liberia lost its economic sovereignty in the early 19th century. Liberia had economic sovereignty in the late 19th century, but the earlier 20th century, it was sabotage. And Firestone is the poster child, is the front runner of that economic colonialization of Liberia.
Thank you. Let me bring you another caller here. That's Aliyu Kamara. Aliyu, you are live, sir.
Yeah, before I get in my point, let me just educate my sister go on Pele a little bit.
Please do, I listen.
In Pele, when we say Tan, that's 1. Vela, that's 2. Sawa, that's 3. When you say Pu, that's 10. So when you say Pu Sawa, that's 10 times 3.
Ah,
okay.
So that's 30.
30.
Okay. I was told it was 10 times 2, 2 tens. Okay.
Yeah, when it's 2, if we Fela, Pu Fela, that's 20.
Ah, but Sawa is 30. 30 cups of rice.
It's
Got
30.
it.
You say Punang, that's 40.
Oh, it makes sense because it was a cup of rice a day. So you get 30 cups for the month. Oh, you smart. Thank you.
There you go.
It makes sense. They wouldn't give you 20 cups for the month because it was a cup of rice a day.
Right.
Thank you for that. Okay, that makes sense.
Finally, Aliyu is very useful as being.
You you let the degree me, but no problem. Yeah, something I'd like to say to our audience. Most of our people talk about Liberian citizenship, how they're more Liberian than others. Here come Cole, who has not lived in Liberia as long as some of these people claim to be Liberian than others, but Cole know deep about this country, and most of them cannot even stand up to understand some of these things that Cole talk about. In fact, they're not even willing to learn it. Look, today history really hit me to a degree. You know, if I wasn't in psychological strong, I'll get mad at white people, to be honest with you. But like you said, this is not what this whole thing about. The thing is that with Kawu is the history and the effort she put in her research is so refined. The only time me and my sister can have small problem is when she injects her opinion. That's when she messes things up, in my opinion, because when you try to apportion equal blame for slave labor, forced labor to indigenous Liberians, that of the settlers, then it becomes very unfair. Now look at this. When the indigenous take their brothers and sisters' children to live with them, they do it for economic reasons. When you have more manpower, then you are able to make much bigger farm. The law still remains, the relationship still remains, your last name still remains, and all men, every man, I think Dennis can relate to this, every man in the village living in a household eat in one bowl. Unlike the settlers, the man who is taken from the village, or the child who is taken from the village to live with the settler, eats in the pot and eats behind the house. His responsibility is to take the toilet bucket and throw it away. And there's a huge demarcation of distinction between the settler's child and the indigenous child in the household. So it was a different situation. The indigenous child living with the settlers is literally a slave, and the indigenous child who's living with an indigenous family is there for economic reasons, basically. And this is where we actually do miss the point. At no time,
this is
another man change another fellow child's last name to their last name.
So that's
it's not
yeah.
Hold on, Carl.
Yeah, so I have a question for him. Do Pella people traditionally have last names?
Yes.
No.
A lot.
No.
Come on.
We don't. We don't. We don't traditionally have last names. We don't.
Aliyu. Yeah, my question I have friends and family members who live in Firestone. And because if you are in a household and you are going to school, so that you will be on a list and get the benefit from who you are living with, you take that person's name. Okay.
No. I don't know which I was born in Firestone. Let me tell you this. All right. Firestone, the first liberal in Firestone predominantly the Pella people, of course. Okay, but there were at no time, my indigenous Liberian, in fact, I was born in Division 10. At no time that people change people's name. It is not in our traditional indigenous history. It never happened.
So I have to come in to correct a couple of things, my brother. So the first thing is last names are very Western, very English, very British. Okay, that's not our culture. It is a Eurasian thing. So everyone had their own name.
Okay, so we have Vaflet Colley, first name Vaflet, last name Colley before the
let me finish my point and you understand what I'm saying. This is a fact. This is not something I'm argue. Let me just explain to you what happened. So Pella people, Mono people, Lama people, you can have a name, but it was not normal that all the man's children took his name. That idea of having a surname and being passed on, a man gets married, his wife takes his name, his children take his name. We had just recently adopted that. That's not our culture. So that is just not our culture. And any native person will tell you that's not our culture. If they're past 40 years old, you have my my grandfather, he and his brothers, everybody had their own name. That's not how we name people in the interior. That was not our tradition. It is a very British practice. Even the people who adopted Islam early on, you usually got your name from your mother's side, the clan side. It's even a different way of inheriting names. So the process of inheriting a last name from the head of the household, the father, is strange and foreign. It's something we do now, but it's not our tradition. It is something we adopted. So that's what I'm saying. Secondly,
Let me just
hold on, Aliyu. I want to take one more caller. We have 8 minutes to end.
No, just really quick, Dennis. So secondly, your assertion that we didn't have slaves.
Aliyu, hold on.
Okay.
I just explained in earlier slides the brutality that occurred during the rolling wars, how children were stolen, brutalized, and used as forced laborers by our people. Children were pawned off to people to pay debts. So we have to tell the whole truth. The simple narrative, like we're all so noble, everybody in the interior was nice, we never abused kids, it's a lie. And the other narrative that every Americo-Liberian took people to children and beat them is also a lie. A lot of them adopted children, gave them the names. A lot of these people didn't even have their own biological kids. A lot of times the children that are carrying their names today, that are carrying their legacy today, were adopted children. Some of these people's own biological children didn't even survive. So to just have this simplistic narrative and paint everyone to be a noble savage or a noble, we just only practice indentured servitude or whatever, and to paint another group of people in this blanket thing, they were all demons, they were all child abusers. It's not realistic and it's not true. There were abusive people in all of these societies. Do not absolve or try to diminish the slavery, the child slavery that occurred among our people. I'm witness to it. People were selling children in our lifetimes. So stop this oversimplifying indigenous people and we're not idiots. We're complex human beings. We've got very evil people among us, and we have good people among us. Here was Mr. Traub. He's a native man. He had to rescue native children and bring them to his school. Bring them to his orphanage because they were being abused by other so-called native people. Human beings have the capacity for good and evil. Being an Americo-Liberian doesn't make you evil. Being a native person doesn't make you evil. This ascribing conduct to someone's ethnicity is wrong.
Thank you. Let me take I'll leave you quickly, then 1/2 minute, and then I can take the last caller.
Okay, I see the passion, and I understand the generalization of the whole thing, but that was not the point of my argument. The point there is, it just depends on what and who and what they believe regarding these things.
Yeah.
For some of us, we are pragmatic. We're very pragmatic about it. She talked about Samori Toure. Samori is not an Arabic name. Toure is not an Arabic name. He had his first and last name before the Arabs came to Africa. So to say that wasn't our tradition, that is also wrong. She talked about Fernando.
No, it's not wrong. This is an anthropological fact. I'm not going to be on this. If you want to dispute something, you should come with facts. I don't like when people just make up stuff out of their heads. That's not our culture.
Okay.
Period.
One minute.
It's not. It's not our culture. You can't come on this platform and misinform people. You got to come with that. You do that on your own show, but you're not going to come on my show and mislead people. That's not right.
Listen, the people that were sending to Fernando were the settler children among them. When they were going to these villages and recruiting people, were settler children among them. Were settlers sent to Fernando Po. So that's not equally, Bronco. But I'm listening to the show. I'm really enjoying it. Thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you. Let me bring my last caller here, and that's Joe Moyo. Joe, you are live. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Hey, first of all, Dennis, I would like to thank you for giving Cow a platform. And Cow.
Joe, if you can't pronounce my name or ask, yeah, Joe, I'm called.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you need to put all these thoughts you have into a book and let that book be taught.
Joe, the book I've written, you have not bought it. Then you turn it another book.
Thank you for the compliment, Joe. I appreciate it.
Very eloquent. and I've been following her for quite a while, because the fact is, a lot of us graduated from high school in Liberia without knowing our history. We went by a history book written by a lady called, I think, Doris Banks, Henry, and there wasn't much of Liberian history taught. I got to really learn Liberian history when I left. First of all, went to England, to go to college, and then came to the United States. That's how I got to know Liberian history. And a lot of what Mrs. Formula is saying, I won't butcher her name. A lot of what Mrs. Formula is something that most people in Liberia don't know about. They ask a Liberian, in the 10, 11, 12 grade, they don't know their history. Liberia also, another thing I'd like to touch on, we've got one of the biggest, largest diaspora in West Africa.
Yeah.
Would you believe when I was a student in England, I went to a place called Liverpool with Mr. Grigsby at the embassy. He said, Grigsby from San Luis, some of our people who want to meet us. And when I went to Liverpool, I saw all these people, some of them, biracial, but with names like Needland, Nagbe. So I spoke to one of the old men. I think his name was Omed Tuba or something like that. He was probably, I'm talking about way back, probably in the 80s. He was probably like 80 years old. And he was explaining to me how he got to England. They had to run away from Sastai, or because of the Sastai war. They ran away because the Liberian government turned against its own people, the Kru people, because they had all these wars. So he said they ran away and went to Freetown, and it was from Freetown the British had this ship called Elder Dempster. He used to do the West African coast, and that's how he started working on that shipping line, and then from there he settled in Liverpool. And I met I think probably 200-300. In fact, even as we speak, I got the ship manifest for a lot of those people. That is, crowd, and so then I'll be happy to give that too. Then I was working when I was working in Liberia. My boss was a crew guy from Liberia, but he spoke fluent Yoruba. He was born in Lagos. So the thing about Fernando, I was doing some research sometimes, because part of me is journalism. That's what I did in college. So I did some research. The descendants of Liberians are still in Fernando. In fact, they have a name for them. I forgot. But like Mrs. Formula said, they're not only Liberian. Some of them are Sierra Leonean, Mende people, mostly crew from Liberia. But the crew people, they all because the ones that are still alive. Somebody told me when some government official from Liberia went to Equatorial Guinea, I think that's how they call it now. There was a group I wanted to meet this Liberian official. He said their grandparents came from Liberia. How they got there? It was through that Fernando transaction.
Thank you, Joe.
So Dennis, I got to tell you, thank you. And you wouldn't believe it, I don't listen to any other radio besides Focus on Liberia. I mean, establishment besides Focus on Liberia. And it's because of people like Mrs. Formula. She comes on and, she opens our minds. Very articulate. She gives the history. Things that I learn every time I tune into her.
Thank you, Joe.
So
Thank you so much.
Formula.
Appreciate you. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Joe. And
that was very good.
Thank you too. Let's wrap it up. I know we didn't end our slide.
All right. So you let's see. You want to finish? So let's just go through the slides really quick. So these are children.
I love these children because this one looked like she's from Dudukan, the girl, because
she looks like she's from Ganta. So let's go to so these are children now, as I said, context. At this period in history, there was probably nowhere in the world where there was not child labor. We had children working in coal mines and and things in the United States. So this was normal stuff in this time period. Unacceptable, but it was considered normal at that time. Let's go to the next slide. So again, AFL just showing, we can go through them pretty fast since we don't have a lot of time. This is just showing how souped up the armed forces of Liberia.
They have boots now. They used to be barefooted.
Oh yeah, the U.S. resources came in, pumped these guys up well. Let's go to the next one. I mean, they were in things, well trained, well armed, clean. And most of these soldiers, of course, were indigenous people, and they were given these jobs. And unfortunately, we can have another show about AFL, but really quick, this guy J.D. Curran, he's a Lutheran minister. He went into Liberia, one of the most celebrated missionaries in Liberia, but he was a very racist, horrible human being in so many ways, and really was one of the guys who exploited human labor, and said your pay is salvation. Next slide.
And talking about him, the lady who I think he took just died in I think it was a year or two ago when she passed away right here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes.
I was at the funeral.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
So these people were, at the time, they were people of their time period, right? Their behavior would be opposite. I mean, they'd be arrested and taken to, accused of war crimes for some of the things that they did. But this is how they spread the gospel. Next slide.
And the family spoke very good about him.
Of course they did.
All right.
Of course they did. Here's some of the hammocks that they used to make people carry them through the rainforest. Sometimes children, sometimes even women. But they had these seats. Their feet didn't touch the ground. They didn't want to walk. Next slide. I'm gonna breeze through this, and here they are carrying the people load all through the rainforest. So all of these missionaries, these churches were built with forced labor, human beings didn't really have an option, and they were not paid. They were not compensated for what they were doing. Next slide.
And talking about missionaries, these people were army of the Lord. They were doing God's will.
Yes, they're doing God's work. Tearing up people's traditional shrines, burning them, chilling in hammocks. Carry us around, you savages. We've come to redeem your soul. Take us to your leader. I'm gonna slap the Kari shell, gamo seed bracelet off his neck because it's Christians don't wear gamo seed. Christians don't eat cola nut. Christians don't drink palm wine. Christians, carry load. Next slide. So these are some of the children that they were coerced into bringing into their missions. They're usually very young. This is an actual photo of children that new recruits to the mission, new students that they brought in. Most of these children, went on to live like Congo people, for lack of a better term. This was the process. You bring them in very young. They did this kind of thing, to Native Americans. They did this kind of thing all over the world. Bring them in very young, indoctrinate them, teach them that their culture is evil, teach them that their parents and grandparents are witches, teach them that they need to divorce themselves from everything that they know. All the people that loved them and nurtured them and fed them. Look how healthy they were. Look how healthy these babies were. They were loved. And here they're bringing them to the mission to teach them that they're people who loved them and brought them into the world and protected them were witches and demons, and that they were going to teach them about God as if Africans didn't know God before they came. Next slide. So this is another example of some children who were brought in, wearing the country cloth. This is up the St. Paul River near Millsburg. This is Millsburg Mission. Beautiful, beautiful children.
Right, they're very cute kids.
Yeah, brought in, and then this is what happens after they go through the process. They come out like this,
like shining like gold.
Yeah, they come out like this. Now we have a new crop of the new Congo people, the new, westernized Africans, and they are the new soldiers, the new vision bearers, for imperialism. and they're going to carry this process forward. And so, education, look at the beautiful girls coming out of school. They're wearing white in the graduation clothes, and they are pure. They have come out of the the savagery of their ancestors. They are now westernized. Hallelujah. All is well.
Amen.
Next slide. This is church. Again, these churches, beautiful building structures all over Liberia, built, by forced labor. They weren't compensated, but beautiful buildings all over the interior there. And next slide.
That was a duplicate.
Yeah, so, here you've got one of the missionaries' children, smiling, because I have to ride in this hammock. I can't walk. Only the African children are going to walk. So he just gets down to take a picture, and when they carry him, and they carry these people all the way to Monrovia, all over the place in these hammocks. So they didn't have to touch the ground. If he didn't have to walk through the creek and all that one. Next slide. Sorry, Dennis, I'm trying to go fast because I know the time. And here you've got more examples of them posing with hammocks. So most of this hammock business, anyway, next slide, Dennis. Do a whole show on hammocks. Miss Laura Traub, this is a very famous woman missionary in Liberia. This photo was taken somewhere around anywhere from 1912 to about 1920. That's, around this time period. The three young men are stated as Enos Tobias, Oliver Lotz, and Amos Harris. So these are clearly children that were named after Lutheran missionaries. Yeah. So the names that they had before have been replaced by the names of Lutheran missionaries. All of these children in her school used to call her Auntie Laura, and that was her name, the term of endearment. But they were not allowed to speak their indigenous languages in her school.
Right. In Dodovacan, we call them Ma. So we have Ma Eastbourne, Ma Swansea, Ma Ma Ramsey. Yeah. So there was, and the male are called Pa.
Fathers. I think we do that in Nimba too, but they call her Auntie Laura. That's what she wanted to be called. So thank you guys for watching.
Thank you so much. Oh, so someone speaking Pelatu Pu Shawa means 50.
I tell you, y'all, man.
We
need to have a Pella dictionary, a Pella University.
Right.
You have to try to preserve this.
All right. Thank you so much I want to thank our viewers for watching. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., I will be here with a cross session of Liberians to talk about why we have so much breakaway, this faction, chaos in Liberian diaspora organizations. I know right now, take for instance, Bon County was divided into two after the election. You have the Joe Kamali wing, and then you have the George Toto wing.
Really?
County Association. It almost happened to UNICO. So you have UNICO and UNIDAB everywhere, even churches. And I learned that even the mass, they're dividing, they're breaking away.
Wow.
Churches in Metro Atlanta here that are expanding, you find over 20 churches because people can't just stay together. They have to break away. What is causing this? It will be right here, Focus on Liberia tomorrow at 3, and it will be live on FM 105.5 in Monrovia. We want to thank all of you for watching. Keep it here at Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Whether you eat pusawa or something, we are all Liberians. That's the message. History is very painful sometimes when you listen to it, but that's our history.
It is what
How
it is.
do we move on? Is what we have.
That's what happens. History is what happens.
For what? That is gone. We can't go back and rewrite our history. It's our history. We have to live with it. We have to accept it and move forward. How we do it? We are all Liberians, and we should make sure that we make Liberia the glorious land of liberty. And that's why we always end with the song that says, we are all Liberians. No matter your ethnicity, your class, your orientation, we are all Liberians, and that what matters. Good
That's
night
perfect.
and God bless you.
Thanks, everyone.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people. Liberia.